I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Another good bloopers content video would be just how many sounds does JT make when he sits down?
I'm an old man.
That's great.
All right.
All right, let's hit it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
And I'm Chris Susi.
And we have a gory episode for you today. We're going to talk about yellow fever. Yes, Savannah's nightmare, honestly. It was probably one of the worst things that has happened to Savannah. But let me go ahead and just kind of dive into the history of yellow fever for those of you who don't have any clue what that is. It was a very common illness here in the South, especially because we are known for our mosquitoes. So if you visited any portion of the South during the summertime, you'll know that we are just in clouds of mosquitoes all the time. And so basically, Savannah had outbreaks every 25 years of yellow fever. It was a disease that really quickly took you because once you had flu-like symptoms, you're pretty much too far gone. At that point, most people lived after they contracted yellow fever about 3 to 7 days. It took them very fast. You had symptoms of jaundice, so your eyes, your skin, your nails all turning yellow, the reason why it's called yellow fever. Also, you would bleed from every orifice of your body. You would vomit blood that looked like black tar. And if you were actually wealthy enough or alive at that point to have a doctor come to see you, more than likely you were going to get treatments such as bloodletting, leeches, and having turpentine shoved down your throat. And one of the worst years that we had multiple really bad years of yellow fever, was 1820. And a lot of reason why people like to talk about that year in specific is because we had 666 people die in the span of 3 days here in Savannah. And so that, AIDS
what do they call that?
The devil's number, or the devil's disease. Yes, they call it the devil's disease here in Savannah. For that reason, but also because it was just horrible. It was literally like being cursed because you pretty much were rotting and bleeding internally. That's never going to be a pleasant way to die. Yeah. So,
Chris, any ghosts that you know of that are like yellow fever ghosts?
So
multiple, yeah.
If I were to name one, and it's fascinating because the Sorrel Weed House is famously haunted by a woman that they believe threw herself from the roof of the building after finding out of an infidelity of her husband, and her name is Matilda, and she haunts the building. And so people oftentimes will say that they see a woman in a black dress. But what people don't know is that she was not Sorrel's first wife.
Ooh.
She was the sister of Sorrel's first wife, and Sorrel's first wife died of yellow fever. What makes that interesting to me is the effect of yellow fever starkly affects your appearance. And it was believed that Yolanda, I believe is her name.
I believe that's right.
Yolanda, who died of yellow fever, during her suffering was made to wear full-length black and a veil to hide her face because being sick was a stigma. And if people saw her, because on top of the jaundiced features and the blood coming out of everywhere, there were also lesions. So it was very easy to tell when someone was sick with it. So apparently, in her pain and in her agony, being made to cover herself from head to toe, she would simply walk around the house wailing because she was in such pain, because she was dying of what would be considered Just a horrible, horrible way to die because it's a long, drawn out process.
Yeah. So they were like, Yolanda, you're depressing us. Put this on.
Or
No.
think of the family.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's
Save face.
Your appearance is just
Literally.
too horrible.
Yeah.
But-
Cover up. And it was, nobody really talks about it, but a lot of times when people see the ghost or they talk about the ghost, they see this woman in black.
Yeah.
And I oftentimes wonder, because everyone will attribute that to Matilda.
Or Daniel Radcliffe.
Nice.
Yes.
They'll attribute it to Matilda, but I oftentimes wonder if it's not the first wife who died of yellow fever. And in many episodes that kind of makes the sense. But that one springs out in my mind. And then there's also the fact that we have a mass grave
Yep.
in Colonial Park Cemetery and in Laurel
It's
Grove.
like
Yep, in Laurel
a
Grove also.
recognized mass grave.
It is.
Like,
It has-
No, it's got a placard.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
like a whole placard and everything.
Yes. Yeah, the mass grave in Colonial Park Cemetery. And I will clarify, if you go to visit it, and we can even put an insert of the plaque, it will say nearly 700 people died.
Right, 'cause
They didn't want to put the devil's number on a big plaque in a cemetery. That, it's the South, so.
Yeah.
But it is actually 666, so
It's
we're
so
not making.
Savannah, isn't it?
It is.
Very, well,
I swear.
again,
Yeah.
I feel like a
keeping
city
up
like
face,
Boston would have been like, oh yeah, let's put the number up there.
Well, Boston honors their grave robbers and their common cemetery.
Yeah.
They honor that. They're very different people up there than it is here.
But yeah, Chris, you were saying that like that's so Savannah. It's like to save face.
Yeah, to
be
save
like,
face. Saving
yeah.
face. If you go through enough ghost stories, you'll find that many of them are about people who were wounded and they wouldn't allow them to get medical treatment to save face.
Yeah.
I think that's the story of Wesley Espy, who was attacked by gangsters, and his father, being a judge, didn't want people to know that his son was attacked, and so he let his son basically die in the parlor of his house.
Yeah, the Espy house.
The Espy house. Yeah.
Y'all looking at me like I'm like an expert.
Well,
But you've been
I'm just
around
here for
us
the dad
enough.
jokes, right? I'm just here for the dad jokes.
And then you've got the mass graves. We have talked about the Davenport House, which we
Yeah.
believe is a ground zero for yellow fever hauntings.
Yep.
And then,
Yes.
of course, the morgue tunnel
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
there on Forsyth Park is primarily a yellow fever story.
And we'll save that one for the episode we're doing next.
For Forsyth.
We're
But
doing
I
that
do like to
Forsyth
talk
next.
about the doctor at 12 West Oglethorpe,
Yep.
too.
Oh yeah.
Because his is such a sad story
So
with
sad.
with yellow fever. It's a very depressing story. So basically, he was one of the main doctors who would treat people with yellow fever, because you got to remember at this time, they didn't realize that mosquitoes were spreading the disease. They thought it was the bodies. So a lot of people did not want to be a doctor to the yellow fever patients because they didn't want to risk catching it. But this doctor, he lived in what is now Husk, the restaurant in 12 West Oglethorpe. But basically, he was walking home one night and he felt super sick all of a sudden. Like, it was like stomach pains and things that brought him to his knees on the front steps. And so a lot of people believe that he went through this inner turmoil before he went into the home of I shouldn't come in, I'm going to eventually bring this plague to my family. But when he goes into the home, his child is already dying of yellow fever. And so he spends the entire night trying to treat his child with yellow fever and trying to save his life, but it's not enough. And so he would eventually go into this super dark depression because every single one of his family members would die of yellow fever, his wife, his other children. And he would pray that eventually it would take him as well, so it would take him out of his misery. And he feels like he was the reason why his whole family died, because he thought he brought it into his home. And so eventually the way he ended up passing was that he went into the first child who passed, his bedroom, and he boarded it up. He closed off the windows and he locked himself in there with no food or water, and he ended up dying of malnutrition and dehydration. And so that was kind of the end of the doctor's story, but it just shows how brutal the disease was because it can wipe out a whole family so fast. So
yeah, and it's interesting to note that the building 12 West Oglethorpe was abandoned and empty for decades, and the prevailing ghost story was if you go and you knock on the door and call out for help, the door handle would jiggle as if the doctor was coming to help, because the ghost story that manifested in the aftermath of all of it was that he would never turn away helping people. So if you knocked on the door, you would draw his spirit because he would want to help, because that's his whole idea and ideology is he will come to help you. And so a very famously haunted building, which deserves its own show. But that specifically creates this heartache, this heartbreak, because a lot of people didn't know the full breadth of the story. All they knew was that a doctor lived there, and if you call for help, he'll answer the door. And then when you learn all of those extra elements of the story, you're like,
why.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, he's one of the spirits in Savannah that are very humane, very gentle.
Very benevolent.
Yeah. And you don't get that a lot with a lot of spirits that are choosing to stay on this side. There are some spirits that are choosing to stay on this side for, reasons of they want to cause torment, or sometimes they're so bitter about their death, or sometimes they can't cross over, but it almost feels like he needs to continue helping others even on this side.
And it's worth noting that benevolent spirits don't have as much impact as tormenting spirits, because benevolent spirits are not trying to get your attention. They're not trying to do things, if they're helping in ways that are probably barely perceivable. Whereas, if you're trying to torment someone, they got to know that they're being tormented.
Yeah,
otherwise,
absolutely.
what's the point? So, it's an interesting statement to say that we just don't talk about benevolent spirits much because their impact on us is almost subliminal, not very invasive at all. I will say that, and again, for another time, 12 West Oglethorpe was a school for a short period of time, and I spoke to some of the kids. Well, they're adults, but when they were kids, they went to the school, and they reported it being a woefully haunted building.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we can go into that in another episode.
Yeah,
that is another episode.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Okay. Well, I had what about the doctor's get up? Like, I know that the doctors wore like a face shield, almost like
a cloth
over their face and all of that. What do y'all know about the
Yellow fever protocols?
Yeah. I mean, I know it's not like super ghosty, but I find it kind of interesting. If y'all don't know much
it's
about
dark
it, it's fine.
history. Well, the problem is
The fact checkers will come in and be like, they didn't wear this.
Well, the problem is it's hard to fact check because it's not super well documented of what they wore. It's not like the plague doctors during the bubonic plague where it was very well documented of what they wore.
Lots of illustrations, and it had to be known that the plague. So they literally made rudimentary posters so that when you see this bird-faced thing coming out of the smoke, you don't freak out. Because their belief was that if you put flowers
the herbs,
into the cone of the mask, it filtered the illness. And I want to say there was rudimentary hazmat-like suits or gear that they would wear, cloths over the face and even like long,
Yeah. A lot of times, whenever there would be like epidemics like that, they would wear leather. I know that too.
Leather was a big part of it.
Because they believed like leather was hard to penetrate, so it would be difficult for the airborne pathogens to get in through your leather suit of sorts. But like I said, especially in a place like Savannah where they don't necessarily want to talk about the darker side of medical practices.
It's so hard to find the backup records, like trying to find stories or accounts even. Like your best bet is like if you can get a hold of a journal or a diary.
Yep.
That was your best hope, but even those are hard to come by.
Yeah. I bet. Now, I know that Madison, you love the story of the Body Man.
Yeah. So
Right. So tell us the story. Tell us the story of the Body Man.
So the Body Man.
I also love the story of the Body.
Body men are interesting because, like I've said earlier, basically they thought bodies were spreading this disease, so they needed to get rid of all of the dead very quickly. So pretty much when you were declared dead, you were wrapped up and you were put out on the front porch and picked up by body men to be taken to Colonial Park Cemetery. When you had yellow fever, they didn't really have time for a big grand Victorian funeral. Those were a very lengthy process. And if they thought you were basically a biohazard, they wanted to dispose of you. So a lot of times the body men were kind of people who were of the lower class. They were people that society deemed less worthy of.
Expendable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were people that they didn't care if they got the disease. So a lot of times they were the ones that were, working all hours of the night. But some people actually ended up getting buried even in their backyard. If the family didn't want, to have their loved one go into a mass grave with a bunch of other random people, they would actually bury their dead on their property.
Yeah.
But that's solely because they couldn't do the Victorian funeral process where, you'd have to send out a servant to go notify the entire family or all your friends or whatnot, because if you died in between biweekly periodicals, there wasn't a daily news at that point. If you died in between those periodicals, somebody had to go out and actually tell people that you died, and then you had about a week before the procession, and then the procession had to be led by the sexton, the person who was the head of office at the cemetery. You had to arrange all these things. You had to have pallbearers. You had to have people who would carry your body there. Also, you couldn't have an open casket at your viewing at your wake.
Yeah.
A lot of
reasons. Everyone to yellow fever.
A lot of reasons why you couldn't have those sort of things, which makes it interesting to note why we might still see a lot of these yellow fever patients is because I would say about 95% of them did not get treated well at all in their burial process. It was honestly kind of disrespectful how they treated the bodies like trash, pretty much. They're just gotta dispose of it, gotta put them in the mass grave.
And there are fundamentally unmarked graves.
Yep.
Fundamentally, their name is not attached to their body. They do not have the same reverence or the same conditional expectations for the respect you pay to the dead. In fact, many people will argue that the placard itself that states that these people are buried here was a cautionary, we got to put something here or all these dead are going to
exactly.
really invade our world, which is tragic in its own sense.
Very much so. The it's also, it was such a traumatic event, and like I said, it happened every 25 years. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of people to be touched by this illness. And that's also why we see a lot of spirits, like the little boy that we saw in the Davenport house. Mm-hmm. He was having to do the really awful
grunt work.
Yeah, the brunt work of taking care of these patients. Right. And that's why you still see impressions of them, because, having to change someone's bedpan and...
I was thinking about that bucket, too.
Yeah, the ghost bucket that everybody's obsessed with.
Well, another possibility of the bucket itself is bleeding, which was common treatment. Oh. Where did that blood go? It's very likely that they used a pail and they cut the victims and they would bleed out. And in many instances, it was that sped them to their death. So, you're carrying the last bit of life away from the the person. It was something that had occurred to me that the bucket could also be from bloodletting.
Also,
which
So head on over to the Davenport house and meet the little boy ghost that carries around a bucket of blood.
Ah, a bucket of blood.
Well, especially during their yellow fever presentations that they do every year. I wonder if he watches this and he's like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. You know, it's
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the Davenport house is super cool, y'all. You need to, if you come to Savannah, you have to go see
visit.
It is beautiful, very well kept, and just owned by pretty good people from what I could tell.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, they are very nice people.
They really keep that house pristine, which is pretty dope.
The and to answer the question of the people in the comments are like, was the bucket still there? Like, what happened to the bucket? A lot of people are obsessed with the bucket, with the little boy, more so than the little boy. They're like, yeah, the little boy's cool, but the bucket, it went with him. So
yeah,
that is a part of him.
Also, there were a lot of skeptics, because of course, even though that did look like a little boy with the bucket and all of that, there were a lot of skeptics saying ghosts aren't real, right? So, or that's something that's there in the hallway all the time. Well, okay. Go on to davenporthouse.com. I think that's what
the
it is.
Davenport House Museum.
They have a Matterport, like virtual tour. It's completely free. Go try to find that. Go try to find that anywhere in any of the rooms. You can go everywhere. You can even go in the attic in that bad boy, huh? I mean, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and also something we didn't touch upon when we went through that story was that I was working in that house by myself. So that area is off limits to guests, and because there's no electricity up on those upper floors. It's very dangerous to be up there if you don't know where you're stepping, because the steps are like this wide and like things like that. So we would often put these ropes up on the steps. So no guest was going up there, but even if they were, I would have been frightened because they were in the house with me by myself, But I had gone up to that second floor already that night to get the ropes, because that's where they're kept. So I would have noticed if there was some kind of mannequin there. Also for the question of why is the photo so blurry?
Yeah.
That's a fair question, because people are like, was this taken in 1976 with whatever? Yeah. When you have cameras that are, even though I believe that was taken with...
It's a screenshot of a FaceTime.
It's a FaceTime, yeah.
Screenshot of a FaceTime. So, yeah, I mean, you talk about the level of compression, just coming from a film expert, the level of compression, of that image is... It's awful, because it's already compressed via FaceTime over cellular data, and then you're zooming into it, and then you're screenshotting it. I mean, you're gonna get a pixelated image.
And it wasn't good lighting, anyways, because I had to have a flashlight with my camera walkie-talkie, or like my company walkie-talkie.
Yeah,
it was garbage lighting. It was basically meant to show you this far ahead of you so you don't trip and bust your face open. That was about it.
So with that, go ahead, check that TikTok out if you haven't seen it. I am actually going to approach the owners of the Davenport house this week, so we can see if we can go in and shoot some exclusive.
There, right?
Yep.
There's people filming there. There's people filming there now.
I'm just saying that it might be locked up.
It might be locked up, but I'm gonna try to go there, when that's not happening, and just talk to them about doing some TikToks, doing a mobile podcast, and then also filming in there ourselves. So we're gonna go for that, and go on to our Patreon, because we're going to have, if I can accomplish all of this, we're going to be uploading some exclusive content on that too. But moving forward past Davenport House, Savannah was actually afflicted by another disease/illness, and I wanted to ask if y'all knew anything about it. It has something to do with the building on Oatland Island, and they immediately got it. All right,
Skiffilus. For TikTok purposes.
Oh, Skiffilus.
Skiffilus.
So they don't.
Yeah. Because TikTok, y'all know, the clock app is very particular about.
So with syphilis was a really big deal in Savannah at the point of time. But could y'all talk about that a little bit, because I mean that's worth talking about.
Absolutely.
And that building's stupid haunted because
Yeah,
of
I
it.
did an overnight there.
You did an overnight?
Really?
Yeah,
Of course you did,
and
Chris.
it was terribly intense. And what we would learn later, so it was originally built as a retirement home for railway workers, and then it became this syphilis treatment facility. But surprisingly, what we learned was it was actually linked with the Tuskegee experiments, if you're familiar with that at all. They were actually withholding treatment to see how far and how terrible the syphilis can become. So people were literally being observed as the syphilis was destroying them. And to make matters even worse, they had an entire ward of children. So these are children who are born with syphilis, and they were monitoring the effects of the disease on youth, and they were not treating them. They were not giving them proper treatment. They did have like an iron lung, and there were occasions where people were in this iron lung for a long time. When we went, the iron lung was still there. All the centrifuge equipment, all of the research facility equipment. So there was a lot of suffering in that building. And they weren't just Savannahans. There was just the region, the entire region. If you had syphilis, it was kind of like an asylum. However, we would learn later that many people were just not treated.
They were tortured.
Basically
tortured.
That's not basically. That's tortured.
Well, they were left to their own devices in a lot of ways and observed. To me,
That's a form.
yeah, it's a form of torture.
Yeah.
To me, the way they looked at syphilis at the time was it was an affliction of vice. It was, and in many cases, they just wanted to know. And this is disturbing as all get out, because this is medical experimentation on humans, and it didn't end there. As a matter of fact, that facility became a facility where they tried to weaponize mosquitoes. And so they put yellow fever, dengue fever in mosquitoes to see if they could weaponize them, drop them on, enemies. And they released them on the public of Savannah.
Who's they? Who's they?
The United States government.
Stop.
Yes. And you can look this up, I believe.
Y'all, if we're not here next week, you know why.
It's a part of...
We're going to get shot.
They were posing as the World Health Organization, but it was actually the United States government. They were weaponizing mosquitoes. It is actually where flea collars came from, surprisingly enough. Because while they're working with these mosquitoes, the researchers had to use industrial strength insecticide, and they were working on little labs with little mats, and what they do is they cut strips of the mat and tie it around their wrist to keep the bugs off of them.
Whoa.
For fear of being infected by mosquitoes that they've infected. So it's very interesting. I want to say that that program would happen. They did it in Florida. They did it in Savannah, and they actually released it on the general populace.
What?
Yeah, just to track the disease. How far would this disease track?
When did they do that?
In the 1950s.
Here?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure it's declassified. I'm pretty sure you can find these documents online.
Yeah, I believe they briefly mention it too in Midnight in the
Garden, Good and Evil.
Yep.
The guy who had the flies.
They do.
He tied flies to himself, and he had a little vial of poison that they said that if you put it in the water main, it will kill everyone in Savannah. That little vial of poison was a part of the project that they were doing out on Oatland Island.
Yeah, and everybody was afraid of him because he worked on that mosquito project,
Yes,
and
he
they're
did.
So they
and they would like, is he having a good day?
Yeah, they're like, is he gonna poison the water today? But yeah, that area, if you go over there, it's now a really wonderful wildlife refuge, which
It was amazing. I got to pet a wolf.
You pet the wolf?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to pet the wolf.
Now it's like a happy little zoo.
Yeah, for kids. And they're like, come look at our possum. And, it's...
I love their possum.
I know.
And I want to say that since our overnight, they have renovated the second floor. But the second floor was like, they still had cots and beds, and they still had the remnants of the lung and the centrifuge and all the, it was like a laboratory. And one of the scariest things that happened to us was we were in the attic, and there was a wheelchair up there, and we never caught it on tape, but we're pretty sure that wheelchair was moving. Like, every time we looked at it, it just looked like it was in a different position. But we were so convinced that we started to camp out watching the wheelchair, and we started hearing ticking, tick, 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 and we're like, what is that? And it got louder and faster, and we're like, what is that? And so we start following the sound, and it was an old Geiger counter, and it just started going off, and we're just like, is something irradiating? Yeah.
Oh my god!
Because there is a site there's a site on that land where apparently they would irradiate living things to see the effect of radiation on things. And some people argue that they did it on inmates. Some people, lots of stories come out of it. But it was a bunker.
Wow.
And I want to say, 10 years, within the last 10 years, they had to do a major, hazmat removal of the bunker.
Wow. Yeah, the 1950s were crazy, y'all. I mean, honestly.
I want to find some of those documents.
You should be able to. I feel like I've read at least the Deerfield experiment, but look it up.
You probably can find things on Georgia Historical Society. I will say Georgia Historical Society has a lot of resources that you can access online that are so great for learning about Savannah's history. They don't really go into the paranormal side of things.
No.
That's usually on account of trying to get to know the people who work there.
They leave that up to us.
Yeah, they do. They leave that up to us. But if you want to learn about historical events, and especially for spirits that you've heard of, it's a great resource.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's what I knew. I knew when I asked that question, Chris was gonna just go off.
Well, yeah.
There's just some questions I have up here, and I'm like, Chris can go off on that one.
Well, I mean, you can feel the energy whenever you go to Oatland Island. It feels so different over there, especially because it's a very isolated feeling area. Obviously it's on an island, but it feels like you're not in Savannah anymore. It feels like you've kind of stepped back in time, because they have that area that is built to look almost like a little village too back there.
So, and again, without any true corroboration, that was housing for security, and supposedly they had convicts that they would experiment on.
Oh my!
So
Lord.
you could trade time in prison for volunteering.
Syphilis?
I think this was more of the yellow fever, dengue fever, biological weapons.
Yeah.
Testing.
Trade time in prison to get yellow fever.
But nobody knew exactly what it was. It was come and do this experiment and we'll either lessen your time. None of that is corroborated, but that is what they say, that village, because there's like a strange dorm-like situation. Yeah. And they believed that they kept volunteers who would come in and have different things taken, because everything that they did was at such small doses that it would not necessarily be lethal.
Wow.
But there are stories.
Yeah. So y'all head over to Oatland Island, support them, go see some ghosties and cute pigs.
Cute pigs. Yeah.
They got wolves. Real cute.
And wolves. Yeah.
And wolves.
But it's for real though. It's you feel like you've stepped back in time in that area, and it feels like it would be a good place to hold these experiments because it's so isolated. And I can only imagine in the 50s it was probably even more so isolated with how much tree growth is around there. It feels like, remember in American Horror Story, that season of it was like a psych ward season.
Yeah, the asylum.
The asylum, yeah. It felt kind of like that.
Well, that's why it was chosen for the syphilis asylum. It was, like I said, it was originally a retired railman's convalescence house, and then when it turned over into this hospital setting, it was very much like a hospital because it was huge.
Sure.
It's a big building.
It is.
So going back to yellow fever, how would, I guess this is kind of a weird question. It's always something that I've wondered. There's so many spirits in Savannah, and when you see them or interact with them, is there anything that's like a telltale that they were afflicted by yellow fever? Because Madison, you always tell me, and Chris, I think you've said this too, that spirits are made when something violent and brutal happens to them most of the time. I guess I feel like you've said that where
one
it's
condition,
like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously yellow fever is something brutal and violent, and it takes them quickly. So there's definitely a ton of yellow fever spirits, I'm sure, around here. I guess my question is, how would you differentiate a yellow fever victim versus, that guy that got hit by the car?
Well, it's interesting because of the fact that sometimes they look sick, sometimes. Not always, though. Not always when you pass over and you become a spirit, you don't always look like exactly how you pass. A lot of times you look like a version of yourself, but it doesn't mean that you have all the oozing, like sores or,
Sure.
that you're not bleeding from your eyes or whatever it is. So a lot of times I find with yellow fever spirits, I've only come in contact with a couple of them. I know that there's more here, but I've only seen a couple of them. It's usually a sense of confusion that they have. Like, almost like they're like, wait, am I actually dead? Like, is it over? Or because it's an illness that takes you so quickly, it sometimes is a bit jarring for spirits because they're like, wait, did I actually die?
Sure.
These were otherwise healthy people. And that's to keep in mind that I talk all the time about like the conditions of haunting, the reasons why the dead bother the living. One of the main ones throughout the world talked about is unfinished business. Unfinished business is basically when a life is on a trajectory that you're expecting to have things happen to you and you die. That's why children have so much potential. There's so much life ahead of them that the unfinished business is so monumental. So when you die young and healthy, your spirit has that, I had more to do. I was going to get these things done. So
Sure.
that concept of confusion, of I'm supposed to keep going.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to have more. I was supposed to have more life. And it's on the converse, a lot of times when people have yellow fever, they actually know they're going to die. So there is a moment of, for a lot of them, the acceptance that this is the end, and that helps, mitigate the spiritual conflict of life versus death.
Sure.
But for very young people, very fit people, very strong people, and people who are taken exceptionally fast, these are things that could easily leave behind the remnant of potential life.
Yeah.
And that potential life, depending on how grand and amazing it is pretty much how powerful the spirit can be. The spirit can be as powerful as the aspirations of the life that was taken.
Sure.
So if you were on your path to becoming the president of the United States, there was a lot of potential that you put into your trajectory. And when it's interrupted, the trajectory goes on, even if you don't.
That makes me feel like if I was killed today, I'd be like a ghost for sure.
Well,
yeah, exactly.
Like, oh yeah, because I've got so much I got to do. I'm like, still got to make movies.
well, I feel like it is partially a choice for some spirits.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to say that's the only, it's a condition.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is partially a choice that spirits choose to stay here for unfinished business. It's not necessarily like they die and then something else is telling them like, you didn't finish out your life's mission.
Sure.
You got to stay as a spirit in this plane, because not all spirits want to, even if they do have unfinished business, not all of them want to stay as a spirit on this plane. But there are You know, so like, let's say if you died today, you very likely could want to stay here, but sometimes when you die, your decisions are different. This is what I'm speculating, you know, is.
Yeah. No, I'd be just making movies in heaven.
It's funny because it kind of, I came up with a theory about basement ghosts and attic ghosts. Basement ghosts and attic ghosts. Anytime you go into a haunted house, anytime you go into a place where people are like, oh, this is scary, there is an innate knowledge that there are two places you don't go. You don't go into the basement, and you don't go into the attic. Because the concept is there's a ghost in the attic and there's a ghost in the basement. But the thing about a house is you spend very little time in the basement and very little time in the attic. The basement and the attic are unlikely places for a spirit to hang out. It doesn't make sense that you'd have a haunted basement and a haunted attic, although all around the world, people will tell you, don't go in the basement, don't go in the attic. And it is my belief that there are ghosts who don't completely understand why they're still here. And they branch into two simple factions. One, they know that they're dead and they want to have the death experience. They just don't know how. But they know one thing. We put the dead under the ground. So they go down to the basement. They go down to where they believe they belong. They belong under the ground because they're dead and death releases them. And so they're instinctively doing the thing that makes them, in their life experience, they should be under the ground. The others are people who do not want to be dead, who do not want anything to do. They will go as far away from underground as possible. They will go to the attic. They will go to the furthest space that they can access to prove that they don't belong under the ground. And of the two spirits, I will deem the attic ghost more dangerous than the basement ghost.
Wow.
While the basement ghost might be more scary, the attic ghost is more about fighting, more about resisting what's to come. So that becomes a thing. And so oftentimes, even when we're not dealing with attics or basements, I will deem something an attic ghost if it is here in spite of death. Like choosing against death, versus a ghost that is happenstantial, understands it's dead, wants to go to the next place, but doesn't know how, and is just kind of trapped. And so in my estimation, those are the two types of spirits oftentimes, and they're not the only ghosts, but I got asked this question, growing up. People would ask me, it's like, why are there ghosts in the attic? Why are there ghosts in the basement? What is it? Are they, tinkering in the basement? Are they, what is it? And the question was good because we don't live in our attics. We don't live in our basements. If anything, it's storage, literally storage. It's where we put things. We put things that we don't want in our main house. So why would there be a ghost in the attic? And why would there be a ghost in the basement? And so over decades of observing ghosts and talking about ghosts and listening to ghost stories, I came up with that theory, and I think it does kind of treat this idea of some ghosts are aware that they're dead and choose to go on. Some ghosts are not aware that they're dead and refuse to accept that they're dead, and so they cannot go on.
I actually definitely agree with that theory, and I'll tell you why. It's because of the Davenport House attic. That place is just its own world, practically.
And you can't take a photo up there without captioning.
Yeah, I actually have.
By the way, if we do an investigation there, let's do it in the winter.
Yeah.
In the winter? Oh, because it gets hot.
Yeah. It's so hot in there. But I actually have a photo of a spirit in the attic of the Davenport house, and we can insert it. But basically, that attic, I've mentioned this before, is painted haint blue. So haint blue, when it is traditionally that color that you paint to ward off the spirits. If you paint it on the outside of your house, on the shutters or on the top of your porch or something like that, it's a good ward to keep spirits away if that's what you're wanting. But when you keep it on the inside, it just keeps them in. So on top of that, the attic always was active consistently. Anytime I was in that house by myself, you would hear the doorknob to the attic go, like it would just spin in a circle constantly. Like it would stop, and then you'd hear it. It would go, and it would like click, and it's a metal handle. So it's very loud, echoing throughout this empty house with just me. So it would be like that. And every time I would bring in somebody, to train or whatever, anytime we would go close to the attic, they would feel like someone was standing behind them. Or if you go into the attic, you always feel like someone's watching you, or things of that nature.
That house is so haunted.
It's unbelievably
it is just
haunted.
so haunted.
Yeah, it's
oh my gosh.
But if that is the case for an attic spirit being more malevolent or being more willing to fight, makes sense why the strongest presence that you would feel would be up there. And same instant with the Davenport house, the spirit in the basement, the little kid that people see, that kid's not going to do anything. It likes to run up the stairs and it likes to move things, but it's really not anything that's going to hurt you. What feels like it could hurt you is up in that attic, so.
Yeah, I like the basement versus attic
I love that
concept.
theory.
I know. I saw you smiling literally the whole time.
Well, yeah.
So into it.
Well, it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
So, my last question. We're going to end the podcast here soon, but for any of our listeners that either live in Savannah or want to come to Savannah eventually, or are planning vacation in Savannah, and they want to visit some yellow fever hotspots to maybe capture some yellow fever ghosts, or just be in the presence of them, what are some hotspots that they can visit? You can have dinner at Husk. We know that.
Yeah, you can have dinner at Husk. You can go to Colonial
Park Cemetery is like ground zero for so many spiritual intersections. So all around Colonial Park Cemetery is good.
Yeah, definitely check that out. You can visit the Davenport house. I'm not going to say you're guaranteed to see specifically a yellow fever patient because of how many things it's been, but your chances of seeing something.
And Forsyth Park.
Forsyth Park also,
Forsyth Park, yeah.
Those are like the main spots of yellow fever. But to be quite honest, yellow fever affected the entire city. Mm-hmm. So you could be staying in an Airbnb that could have been a home for somebody who was ridden with yellow fever, and we have no idea of it because there's no documentation.
Well, and there's no way, given the epidemic spread, that it didn't affect people. So just the collective sorrow of an entire city in the throes of an epidemic where someone died because of this disease. So there was these periods of woe that were so intense and so tangible that, and I've seen people experience this where they're just walking and all of a sudden they're just hit with a wall of sadness. They just sense that they've experienced something, and I think it's the collective nature of losing that many people and it being so centralized and so, because Savannah was always kind of small. And so, when 666 people fell dead, that was a good part of the population of the time. I want to say in the 1870s, it was in the thousands, and it represented like 20% of the population dying. Yeah. And that's significant. That's an amazingly significant amount of people in a small, network of people.
Sure.
Having these interactions.
It's also a visceral reaction to not know how if you can catch this disease, if you have it, are you carrying it? Think of it of how when COVID first came about, how paranoid and scared everyone was about this illness that we don't quite understand, and how much fear people had. That's a lot of energy that goes out. So especially if you contain it to a small area like Savannah, with that same intense amount of fear of not knowing whether you could die next week from this disease.
And we had heard accounts of when people were affected with this disease, there's a period where the discomfort, the sheer discomfort of it would not allow you to lie down. So you would walk. you would just walk to try to alleviate. Before you lost the strength to walk, you found yourself moving, because lying down, your skin was like, if it pressed against things, it really hurt. It really was very uncomfortable. There's lesions happening everywhere. So the only way you could feel anything. So imagine these shambling, zombie-like, bleeding from their eyes and their mouth, their lesions.
Jeez.
That was a horrific sight, to see somebody literally dying before you but not able to rest. It's not a restful death.
No. Wow, that's creepy. That needs a movie.
It practically is.
Let's make it, Chris.
Right?
Easy peasy.
Do it. Well, he's probably about $1 million. All that makeup. We'll get there. We'll get there.
We're moving.
Join our Patreon.
Yeah, join our Patreon if you want to see a yellow
step. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
If you want to see a yellow fever movie, but
for sure.
Right.
All right.
Do you have any other questions, Jay?
Nope. I think you answered all my questions.
All right. Well, if you guys have any suggestions of things that you want us to talk about, please feel free to let us know. You can comment on the YouTube video. You can comment on our TikTok, on our Instagram with suggestions. Also, please feel free to leave any questions that you have in our Q&A button on TikTok. That way we are for sure going to see it, because sometimes the questions that people leave get lost in the comments on TikTok. And there goes JT's water bottle. But with that being said, though, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. This has been a fun episode. We have lots of fun things coming on to TikTok, Patreon, all of that. So if you do want to support us in that way, we do appreciate you guys. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, we'll see you in the next episode. So my name's Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And stay spooky, y'all.